Well, Brian, speaking of a cooked goose, unfortunately, we have sad news to relate to all the fans out there, but don't get too broke up over it because it apparently happened a while ago. But every once in a while, Uncle Dave in his newsletter, he'll mention who the oldest living wrestling personalities are around the world. And I think there's a fellow in Mexico that's like 102 years old, and Bob Caudle, bless him, is like 95 this year, I think, and he's just a wonderful human being. But the oldest American wrestling personality for the last number of years living has been listed by Uncle Dave as Cowboy Bob Ellis, who this year, whenever his birthday would turn 96. And every time I've read that, I've said, you haven't seen Bob Ellis in ages. You haven't seen him decades, I don't think. I don't know that we've heard anything about him, a picture of him. He never went to fan fests. That's odd. Everybody else from his generation made some kind of appearance. A poor fella. Hopefully he's not incapacitated some kind of way. Brian, we just found out a couple of days ago he's been dead for like 7 years. Nobody knew.
Surprise.
So that's why in the internet age, and I saw some of the kids on Twitter, who knows who Cowboy Bob Ellis was one of the biggest babyface box office attractions in the business. In the early 60s, we know who Buddy Rogers was. We know Dick the Bruiser, Bob Ellis and the Bruiser in Indianapolis, and that's why when I first started watching Bruiser's TV, Brian, I loved Bobby Heenan, and I loved, Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher and Sam Miniker, right? The announcer. And all of the Bruiser brought in the Crusher as his partner, or had Wilbur Snyder as his partner, had Bruno for a while as his partner, and the tag teams like Ernie Ladd and Baron von Raschke and the Valiant Brothers. But then it was almost like an alternate universe because they shot the TVs at the Expo Center in Indianapolis at the house show, and they'd have 3 preliminaries and a main event. And the main event the finish may not be shown on TV, is what I'm trying to say. And on the week that it wasn't something involving Bruiser and the tag teams, it would be Cowboy Bob Ellis and Baron von Raschke for what seemed like ever. And they would rerun shows because if somebody was on top coming up, they'd put new interviews in, but they'd rerun a show featuring somebody that was on top. And I saw one Bob Ellis and Baron von Raschke match. It must have been 15 times. And at this point in time, Bob Ellis now we come to find out he was like 45 years old at that point. But apparently he was never a good worker, but in his younger days, because he was the real cowboy, he was the good looking, oh shucks, well folks, howdy ma'am guy. He drew money with all the big heels, and he was huge in Madison Square Garden, or the Midwest for Barnett, or anywhere that he went. And then he pretty much kind of rode on that fame in Indiana for Bruiser, primarily in the 70s at the end of his career, because he was a household name there. But great, it wasn't pretty by that time, but goddamn.
And the wig was off by that point, right?
Well, that's the thing is he lost hair. He was starting to lose his hair, and he worked Tennessee in 1977. I have pictures I took of him. I met him. He and Jimmy Garvin were the Southern Tag Team Champions for like 3 weeks. Imagine that pairing. But Jimmy Garvin before he was gorgeous, and Bob Ellis after he was young. But he still had a tan, and he had the fucking presence, right? And he was tall. But the point is, the hair, he tried to have the wig, and that didn't work, but also because of all those years as a babyface and getting juice for the Sheik and Bruiser and, whoever else he was on top with. And one of his things was you'd hit him with a chair, you'd bust him open or whatever, he'd roll out and he would do a death walk through the people so that they could see that he was disoriented and they could see up close he was really bleeding. And he didn't know what was going on. And he builds the concern and then he turns and he looks and he starts heading back to the ring. And he gets in the ring and makes his comeback. Now, the comeback, probably the least exciting part of that, but the people were jumping up and down before him getting back in the ring, right? So anyway, after 20 years of doing that, the story that I was told, I didn't hear it from him personally, but he had the dermabrasion done to his head because his head, all the gig marks, right? His whole forehead was scarred up. And he had the plastic surgery where they flatten it out or smooth it over or whatever they do to it. And he was like 2 years from retiring, and guess where he fucking went?
Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico, and turned heel on Carlos.
Oh. No blood needed for that feud.
So he's a little early with that surgery. But anyway, point being, one of the biggest babyface stars of that generation, everybody else has been accounted for. A name of that magnitude that was on top for so long in the business, everybody's been kept track of. How the fuck did this just happen and nobody got it? Was he in a federal witness protection program?
I don't believe so. And Alan Blackstock, Alan Cheapshot on Twitter, was the person I saw who got it out there to everyone. And it was surprising because, like you said, it's been a discussion going back a little while at least. Every few years, who's the oldest living wrestler? I remember it popping up like around, I guess, 2016 or so when Ed Francis died and Lord James Blears died the same year. And they were both in their 90s. And it was like, wow, there was something about Hawaii that kept these guys going.
You think?
But who else is in their 90s? Like, that was the discussion. And Bob Ellis was always on that list. And again, he was a major star. I don't know about FanFest. Everyone has their preferences, but to go completely radio silent was surprising, I guess.
Well, and I guess he was he 88 or 89? He almost made it, but this was in 2018. We just found out. So everybody has moved up a spot or they always actually were up a spot without knowing it. I'm sure that gives comfort to Bob Caudle. You think some knucklehead's going to call Bob and say, would you like to comment on being the oldest American wrestling personality?
He'll hold the phone like it's floating away. Fans, we got to go!
And so this from now on, is this going to be like a reverse Generalissimo Francisco Franco is still dead? Every once in a while do we announce, ladies and gentlemen, Cowboy Bob Ellis is still alive.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dory Dixon has returned from the dead. No, I don't know.
He's still around. No, he's
is he
one
still
of
alive?
them, isn't he?
I thought so, and then I started thinking to myself, he must have died. I missed it. But hold on,
no,
I'll check. Let me check.
I think you can probably Google quicker than I can imagine. But
no, you're right. He's still alive. 90 years old. Born February 1st, 1935. Dory Dixon.
Jamaica, Hawaii. Oh, I want to take you to who's from Bermuda, Bahama, or has a pretty mama. Something about the tropics.
He was from Jamaica, but he ended up staying in Mexico. He's in Mexico now, I believe, isn't he?
Well, it's still warm down there.
It says here he's a pastor for the Seventh-day Adventist Church, preaching about religion and physical health all over Mexico.
Well, and at 90 years old, travel must be difficult for the poor thing.
All right, well, watch out, Dory Dixon. But we'll be...
What is this? Jesus Christ, we're not trying to curse anybody or anything. There's a few people in their 60s I'd like to see leave first. But anyway, I saw Dory Dixon wrestle on TV also.
Where?
He worked, he was partners with Bobo Brazil in the early 70s and worked Goulas TV. Believe it or not.
Huh.
along with the original Amazing Zuma, who was just a little squat,
Man,
short job fellow at that point.
I think I may have said this to you off air. You know, there's the famous photo. It's one of the most famous photos in wrestling history, if you really think about it, because it got into a lot of newspapers, of Antonino Rocca doing a split, like jumping in midair and touching his toes.
Yes.
And then because Zuma was a ripoff of Rocca, although they ended up working together, they did the same pose with him, and it looks ridiculous because he's a little chubbier, he's got the mustache, he's losing his hair, doesn't have any confidence in his face.
And his head also, do you believe his head, is this the way you feel, that his head was a little bit larger than it should have been for his body?
There was something going on, and it becomes even more amazing when you realize for a brief time he was a draw, like at Madison Square Garden. He was a draw in the Northeast. At the same time, Pfeffer was doing all of his things when Rocca was there, and then they all worked together. But there's another guy I just recently found in the Wrestling News Archive. I forget his name. I'll find it. I'll post it. Same thing. He's doing the pose. And he looks ridiculous because it's another ripoff of a ripoff of Rocca.
Well, and to be honest, Zuma, it was capitalizing on the Rocca craze. Here's a guy that does shit like Rocca. Let's keep an eye on him. And then they built to the matches eventually, and they sold out a couple times. But Rocca was, 10 years into that run. Zuma was zoomed in and zoomed out.
It's when you are literally copying the photos. Like, what can we do? Let's show them exactly the way. That's where it gets a little weird. That's like Crispin Glover not being in the movie, but you get a replacement guy. I don't know.
I got a picture of Tony Charles doing that. Jumping up and touching his toes.
No one will mistake him for...
Well, no, he doesn't look like anyone. No, he was warming up one night in Louisville. And back there was jumping up and doing that. He was in his mid-40s, just an athletic son of a gun, in incredible shape. I said, let me see if I can get that. He did it 3 more times because you have to catch it, you have to be quick on the trigger finger. But I got one. And he actually was spread out a little bit more than, well, he was an old slut anyway, Tony Charles. Nevertheless, all righty then.